Hello and welcome to episode 289 of the Clean Energy Show. Coming to you from Lake Louise in the Rocky Mountains of Canada, I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham, coming to you from the normal place. This week, the ludicrous number of fossil fuel lobbyists at COP30 in Brazil kind of got their way. The big oil Death Star will now destroy the planet in 3, 2, 1.
Commence primary ignition.
That doesn't sound good. The state of Arkansas has turned on its very first utility-scale wind farm. The catch? All the power will go to Microsoft. Turns out Bill Gates needs a ton of energy to keep his elaborate mind control project running.
Iran's leader threatened to evacuate the capital city of Tehran and move it somewhere else. It's home to 7 million people, all due to water shortages primarily caused by climate change. But when he heard the people of Tehran would be roaming the desert for generations, causing a New Testament to be written for the Bible, he backed down to work on Plan B.
Insurance companies have figured out how to adapt to climate change. They're hiring risk assessors whose specialty is climate risk. It's a win-win for the insurance companies who make money on consulting fees and the insured who are more prepared for disaster. Did I say win-win? I meant win-win-lose. In this scenario, the only loser is the planet Earth.
All that and much more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And Brian, you're coming to us from the Rocky Mountains in Alberta, Canada, the province next door to us, almost on the border of British Columbia. You're almost 2 provinces away, but it's a multi-province show, not an international show like we've done in the past. But
well, I'm in Lake Louise, and it is driving distance from our home. It's about a 9-hour drive, so I've never been here before, always wanted to go, and it's only a 9-hour drive. Why not? Well, the only reason why not might be snow, because this time of year, of course, it can snow in the mountains, but, all the forecasts, all the weather looked perfectly great, but it was just the last 20 minutes getting into Lake Louise, unfortunately. The snow finally came. There had been no snow here until about 2 days ago. And it finally came. So a minor blizzard on the way in for the last 20 minutes.
It's a pretty major highway, though. It's not a windy goat road or something like that. It's a double-lane highway from the Trans-Canada number 1, the big one that goes east to west. I can't believe you've never been there before. That doesn't check out. How is it possible any Canadian has never been there?
Well, I have a vague memory. I might have spent 10 minutes here back in the 80s. I can't quite remember. I'd have to look at my old... It seems to me...
I think I was here in the 60s once. I'm not sure.
I think maybe I drove in, took a picture, and then left once in the 80s. I'd have to consult my old photographs and see if I could find one. And if you're watching me on video, we do have a little bit of the mountains in the background there. It's quite spectacular here.
It's from, one vantage point, the mountains in the background, the lake in the foreground is one of our foremost postcards for Canada, and a very beautiful sight. Is the lake frozen or is it watery?
It's half frozen. There's a water patch in the middle. It's more frozen than I thought it would be, but yeah, we're staying at the Chateau Lake Louise, which is really the only hotel here that looks over the lake, and half the rooms look over the lake, and it's really, really spectacular. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is we drove here with full self-driving in the Tesla, and we were driving down a highway in Alberta, and there was a tumbleweed rolling across the highway, which is a thing we have around here sometimes. And it was a really big one, like a very large tumbleweed. There's a way you can do that, press a button or something. But anyway, it was just starting to come across the highway, and I thought, I'm going to have to take over from the full self-driving to avoid this tumbleweed. Like, it wouldn't be the worst thing to hit it, but just as I had that thought, before I could finish the thought, the car changed lanes and swerved a little bit and avoided the tumbleweed.
Wow, that's good, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
See, I'm very curious, having hit wildlife once in my life, a deer in Wyoming, that I'm all for technology preventing something like that from happening, because it can happen so fast that I'm hoping that AI in cars can sort of detect wildlife on the side of the road before they jump in front of you and, avoid that sort of thing. Because it's a lot of insurance claims for that around, I'm sure, Wyoming, where all the deer were congregating in the world that year.
No, it's really bad. On that last sort of stretch into Lake Louise, though, they've done a good job. They've put up wildlife fences along the highway, and then they have those wildlife crossing bridges that go across the highway. So
This is a national park, Banff National Park, so they're protecting the wildlife there.
but the idea is that the car should be able to theoretically react faster than a human. I mean, if the deer was running at full speed onto the highway, maybe there wouldn't be time. But I was, like I say, just about to finish my thought of, oh, maybe I should take over. And the car just did it before I could finish the thought. All right, our first story from Electrek. This is not a particularly big wind farm, but I thought there was a lot of good sort of discussion points in this article. It's the first utility scale wind farm in Arkansas. So that's good news, right? They've never had one before. It's only 135 megawatts, which is not super large or anything. I thought it was interesting that, we always talk about very, very large wind turbines. These are 4.5 megawatts. So the small ones are still, being made and being deployed.
I don't think that's uncommon for, onshore, like on land. They tend to be smaller than I think that's pretty common size now. I think that's the size that they're putting up around here.
Yeah, it's hard to tell from just looking at them because they always look enormous. But so it's 32 of these 4.5 megawatt turbines. But yeah, all the power is going to Microsoft. Like they have a deal with Microsoft. So
the first wind farm in Arkansas is just for Microsoft. And probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Microsoft. Well, maybe the good news is maybe they'll get used to it and put up some more and say this isn't the end of the world. Like if Microsoft needs this, maybe we do. Maybe our power utility does.
yeah, well, yeah, the bad news is that just the regular utility customers don't get the benefits of this, but the county that has, given out the permits, they're going to get $950,000 a year and then $50 million to local landowners over the project's lifetime. So all these farmers are getting paid. Wind turbines are great for farmers because they don't really disrupt what you're already doing with the land. There's just that small footprint of the, where it actually connects to the ground. So that's good. So yes, that, should be a good step forward in Arkansas. But, we've been always talking about these gigantic projects in China. So, this was newsworthy because it was the first one in Arkansas. But it was just sort of a reminder of how much further the U.S. has to go to catch up with what China is doing. Like it's just one gigantic project after another that we keep talking about here on the show. And, still we have states that have never had them before.
And you remember, China is almost the identical size geographically to the United States. If you superimpose each of them, they're both the same. But, a lot of China's population is concentrated on the coast. And of course, it's got a lot more population than the United States, a lot more population, well, except for India now, but it's a huge country population-wise, and they have lots of deserts where they sometimes pump in solar on high voltage DC lines, which is, they're at the forefront of that too. But the United States isn't terrible, I wouldn't say. In the past, they compared to some countries, compared perhaps to Canada as far as modern renewables go, but hitting a bit of a problem there.
Hit and miss. And as we all know, AI, it's obviously a huge news story these days, how much energy all these AI data centers are going to take up. So it's not just the normal growth of the utility grid that we need. We need extra growth to handle all the extra stuff that, we're doing with all this technology. So yeah, in this case, it all goes to Microsoft. But I guess if, they would just be buying it, sucking it out of the grid if there wasn't this project. So yeah, sort of a mixed bag, good news, bad news kind of story.
Well, as you may have heard, the annual COP30 conference, the conference of the parties, or it's an odd name. Yeah, something like that. The Cooperation of the Parties. It's a meeting that's been going on for 30 years. All the countries in the world, even Russia, but not the United States this year. The United States did not send a government delegation. There was delegates there, but not a delegate, not an official government presence, which was, kind of good and bad, though, because they could actually, they had this conference recently where they were working on maritime pollution from ships, like International Marine Organization, IMO, I think, and they kind of sabotaged it. They went there and they sabotaged it because they don't believe in climate change. Or at least the government of the United States doesn't believe in climate change. But so in a way, it was kind of good that they weren't there. But there was no mention of fossil fuels in the final agreement, which a lot of people wanted, and it just didn't end up there.
Transition away from fossil fuels. A promise to do just that was made 2 years ago at COP28 in Dubai. But it's those words that petrostates led by Saudi Arabia have been trying to unpick, to the fury of the 80 countries who want a concrete roadmap away from oil, gas and coal.
Fossil fuels are the cause of more than 80% of the emissions that are generating climate change. We cannot look at the people and the future generations if we don't do something now. And we cannot accept a text that is not dealing with the real problems.
Fossil fuels had been mentioned 3 times in the original draft text, with plans to encourage countries to overcome their dependency on fossil fuels, or instead to urge them to work together on phasing out fossil fuel subsidies and to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly and equitable manner. But the final draft, subject to fierce lobbying, dropped any mention of fossil fuels at all.
And of course, that pisses me off, Brian. I'm not happy about stuff like that. It's not to say that the conference wasn't a failure as a whole, but there was a hope and a movement by many countries, vast majority of the countries in the world, to have language to phase out fossil fuels, to find a pathway to do that and to negotiate that. But no, Saudi Arabia and even Canada didn't sign on, and I don't think India and China did either. But former U.S. Vice President Al Gore, who I love because he's emotional and angry like I am, and he was emotional and angry in a tweet, which I'm about to read to you. He was at the talks, not representing the United States, because no one was on any real level, but he tweeted the following: "Petrostates and their political allies are doing everything they can to try and stop the world from making progress on solving the climate crisis. They fiercely oppose what would have been the most important step forward at COP30, the development of a roadmap away from fossil fuels, wanting nothing more than the world to kick the oil can down the road. When it comes to global climate action, the COP30 consensus is the floor, the bare minimum of what should be done, not the ceiling that limits what is possible. Despite petrostates' attempt to veto the development of a roadmap away from fossil fuels, the Brazilian COP30 presidency will lead an effort to develop this roadmap, bolstered by more than 80 countries that already support the effort. Ultimately, petrostates, the fossil fuel industry, and their allies are losing power," says Gore. "Just as we have passed peak Trump," he says, "I believe we have also passed peak petrostate. They may be able to veto diplomatic language, but they can't veto real-world action. Countries, companies, cities, and states worldwide are moving forward to adopt the clean energy solutions that will create jobs, grow economies, and prevent the health catastrophes associated with burning fossil fuels. The rest of the world is fed up with delay and denial. Now is the time to forge global partnerships among all levels of government, the private sector, finance, and civil society to cultivate and achieve the level of action necessary to fulfill the promise the world made to the future generations under the Paris Agreement." And of course, Al Gore, noted for having invented the internet, maybe not, maybe that was a mistake, that was a misinterpretation, but he has been supporting climate as long as anybody alive, pretty much. The first Earth Summit, or United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, was held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, from June 3rd to 14th in 1992, and we have a clip.
"I believe, and many others do, that the task of saving the Earth's environment will become the central organizing principle of the post-Cold War world, especially after the Earth Summit. I believe deeply that the United States must be in a leadership position in this post-Cold War era. And all of this mishandling of our country's relationship to the rest of the world here at the Earth Summit by the White House with its divisions, all of that has hurt our country's ability to be a leader on these important issues. And we should be. We have the record as a country to do it if we just stop backtracking on environmental protection.
So, this was a little after I was talking about the documentary on Netflix, The White House Effect, where George H.W. Bush went into his presidential campaign supporting the environment based on droughts and, accepting greenhouse gas emissions are warming the planet. We have to do something about it. Then that flipped for preference to oil nations, including his own. And then Al Gore at that time was at the forefront of all this, and he was right. In a post-Cold War world, our number one focus is on the planet, on climate change, because this is what we have to focus on. In the United States, he was imploring them back then to become a leader, and they did not really become a leader. China did. And China is now, the people who put out solar panels for the world, mostly, although we'll talk about something in the United States later in the show. Wind turbines are largely manufactured there. Electric cars, and way more than anywhere else, are being manufactured in China, and they're doing a better job of it there too. So he saw what was coming. But Brian, these conferences are always a compromise because every country, even Russia, has to agree to something. Like, it's a low common denominator of what's going to be acceptable to people sign on to, because I'm not sure that that's always the best. So I'm kind of curious about this group of 24 countries that has agreed to work together outside the UN climate process to phase out oil, gas, and coal. I'm disappointed that it's only 24 countries. Maybe it'll grow, but it was kind of a last second thing. And as part of this effort, Colombia and the Netherlands will host the first international conference on fossil fuel phase-out in April of 2026, an initiative that Brazil will also supported during the closing session. So maybe this will gain steam and become a thing. And I doubt that Canada's going to sign on as a petrostate. I doubt the United States will even acknowledge this existence other than to poo-poo it.
Yeah, progress is always slow when you have to get thousands of people to agree to something. All right, a story from Bloomberg. Companies are paying insurance companies for more than just their premiums. They're always also paying for risk consulting ahead of disasters. So we've talked a lot about the insurance industry because there's going to be problems as these climate disasters seem to get bigger and bigger. How are insurance companies going to remain viable? How are consumers going to be able to afford insurance? Because the premiums are definitely going up. But what are they doing? Insurance companies are hiring risk assessors whose specialty is climate risk. And the example from the article was talking about a warehouse, and the risk assessor went up on the roof, and there were sort of several things that the risk assessor was able to point out. There were solar panels that weren't quite secured enough in terms of high winds. There was tiny little holes in the roof that, probably from hail, so possible water could get in there. And then there was a damp corner of this roof where moss was starting to grow. It was water that was not draining properly. So what's the answer? Well, you got to clean all that stuff up. You've got to keep your buildings and properties maintained. And it's not something that maybe people worried about enough in the past, but in some cases, you won't be able to even get insurance without paying for one of these climate risk assessments. There's certain companies that, depending on where you are and what you're doing, the insurance company might look at you and say, this is too risky. You're going to get flooded out. You're going to get a hurricane, whatever. But in some cases, they're able to pay for a climate risk assessment, make some upgrades to whatever, and then they can actually possibly, hopefully, get insurance. So there's some nice statistics here. Over the next 25 years, the world's 1,200 largest publicly traded companies will face an annual bill of $1.2 trillion for climate impacts on infrastructure unless they take significant steps to protect those assets. That's according to S&P Global, who has done these surveys. And there's a nice graph here. Extreme heat is the largest of this, 1.2 trillion in potential risks, 700 billion in extreme heat costs, over the next 25 years for the world's biggest companies. So, yeah, this is how the insurance company is kind of trying to get this stuff under control. And, they make more money up front. And then hopefully, their clients are better protected and less likely to make a claim, which is really what everybody wants.
Yeah, that's what this is about, is saving the insurance company money, because some insurance places in the United States and California aren't even insuring anymore, right? That's a major issue. If you can't get house insurance, you can't get a mortgage. So that's going to ruin people's lives and affect them. Or if you do have a house and it burns down, one day, eventually it's going to burn down in a wildfire or have a high likelihood of that. Yeah, there's fire risk assessors in California, I know, that go from home to home, and a lot more can be done, especially when they're building new homes. But this is a major issue. It's an issue in Florida. It's an issue here. And insurance costs are rising rapidly everywhere. There's hardly a place in the world that's not affected by rising insurance costs because of climate change. And that's now. It gets worse from here. It gets far worse from here. We got to do something. And the costs are enormous. We should be doing something about it. But, if you deny climate change, like the administration of the United States, you're screwing your economy in the future. But a lot of it is now. Make money now. Let's get rich now and let God take care of the rest. I have to admit, climate risk engineer is a job that I've never heard before. It's a first for me. Maybe it's a first for a lot of our listeners. Kind of a cool job.
Yeah, it turns out it is a growing profession. So if you want to get into risk assessment, study up on your climate change, I guess, because, basically all the insurance companies now are starting to hire risk assessors with a specialty in climate risk.
It's probably a good idea. And speaking of crap, Tehran may have to move. That's the capital of Iran. And they may have to move due to climate. The president a couple weeks ago said, hey, I don't have a solution. We're running out of water. 7 million people, 8 million people are going to have to move, which is an impossible task. So he, of course, backed down from that, or his administration started watering down the language a little differently. But Iran's capital must be moved, he says, because the country no longer has a choice. And he said on Thursday, he warned that severe ecological strain has made Tehran impossible to sustain. It's sinking, Brian. They've used up all the groundwater below. This is a problem in California, not necessarily in the major cities, but in the country. You use up all the groundwater, and that sort of lets you sink. There's not that pool, that lake underground anymore, and the thing sinks. And that affects infrastructure. It affects all kinds of things. They don't have enough water for power there. They're cutting the power 2 or 3 times a week, and they have been since February because of the drought. Because power stations take water to cool. A thermal water station, you have to cool things. Even a nuclear plant requires water for cooling, and you can't do that. That is one big advantage of, we've seen nuclear plants in France have to shut down because the rivers were getting too warm. So they had to say, hey, cut it down. We can't lose the fish and the ecological strain that will put on the water system. But wind and solar, of course, does not do that. That's our favorite, probably, renewables that we talk about on the show. He has warned that severe ecological strain has made Tehran impossible to sustain, but both the sinking and just giving water to people. Like, you can't use water at night. They cut off the water at night. You can't use it at night. Power cuts are continuous, which affects the economy. We've talked about that a lot on the show. And even on top of everything else, there's terrible pollution right now in Tehran. And people are told to stay indoors because dust in these desert areas can, and most of Iran is desert, but they do have a border with the ocean that they wanted to move Tehran to in the opposite end of the country. Yeah, this is just not going to move. So they were mulling for years, decades, about moving Tehran to the south coast. But cabinet subsequently softened the language, and infrastructure, well, there isn't any. There's just nothing there. So it would be kind of hard. They're running all these water pipes across the entire country, like thousands of kilometers of water pipes to try. Some just go to industry. Some just go to like a steel mill, because you need water for steel mills to cool the steel once it's melted, right? And that just turns to steam, and it's probably not recovered. The president also said the pressure on water, land, and infrastructure had left the government with no option but to act. And he said, when we said we must move the capital, we did not even have enough budget. If we had, maybe it would have been done. The reality is that we no longer have a choice. It's an obligation, he said. I don't think it's going to move. I don't think so, but I don't know. He said that Tehran faces a catastrophe as land in parts of the capital sinks by up to 30 centimeters a year. I'm no engineer. Neither is my son, even though he claims he is. That's a lot on infrastructure. 30 centimeters a year. I mean, we have shifting around here in clay soil, but it's not 30 centimeters a year. Otherwise, we'd all be a pile of rubble here. Tehran is sinking due to over-extraction of groundwater, a problem exacerbated by drought, dam construction, and inefficient water use, which is leading to the soil. The government has done a terrible job, too. They've wasted the water and put it in industry without worrying about consequence. This land subsidence is a major problem because it threatens critical infrastructure like buildings, roads, and airports, and increases the risk of damage from earthquakes. So this makes earthquakes worse in Iran. It endangers the city's water supply as well, because that can get cut off, and overall stability of everything. Iran's president warned that mismanagement, construction in upstream areas, and cuts to downstream water flows risk irreversible damage. President Pezeshkian, damn it, I can't say that. President Pezeshkian, said officials across government must work together or a dark future awaits. Protecting the environment, he said, is not a joke. Ignoring it means signing our own destruction. That's you don't expect Iran to be talking about the environment like that. But this is the reality. When reality bites you in the ass, that's what happens. You start talking about the environment. The president said the mismatch between water resources and demand had reached a breaking point. We can bring water from the Persian Gulf, but it would be costly because you have to desalinate it. You have to spend lots of energy goes into that. Solar can do the trick, but still, it's a lot of water. He says the population and construction load can no longer expand. Iran announced in January that the government was studying plans to move the capital to the southern Makran coast, a remote region overlooking the Gulf of Oman. And officials said the shift could ease Tehran's overcrowding, energy shortages, and water stress. This is not good for that city. The idea has surfaced repeatedly since 1979, the revolution, and has stalled due to political resistance and soaring costs. Of course, it would have been cheaper in 1979 than now, but that's the way things work. That's the way the cookie crumbles. The government cookie crumbles. Officials have said that Makran's coastline offers access to the Indian Ocean and a base for sea-linked economic projects, like ports. The area includes Iran's only oceanic port. Critics say the region is underdeveloped, exposed to security risks, and far from ready to host a national capital. And opponents argue the country cannot afford the tens of billions of dollars such a move would require. But what are you going to do, Brian? Like, they're between a rock and a hard place, to put it lightly.
Water is, along with energy, we're going to continue to need lots of water in the future. I mean, I think sometimes AI data centers need water to cool things as well. So it's an overall energy crunch, including water.
And all this gets worse. Tehran is one place, but this goes elsewhere too. It spreads and it gets worse and worse. That's why we have to do something about it, and we can. Reach out to us now, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We'd like to hear from you. Anything you have to say. Coming up next, the lightning round. Time for the lightning round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
Electric heavy trucks are taking off in China, where owners can save an estimated 10 to 26% over the vehicle lifetime compared to combustion vehicles. This is causing China's diesel demand to fall. It's down 11% year on year. Clean energy investor Craig Lawrence said he was offered a high-quality 385-watt all-black solar panel, shipment of them from Chinese top brands, for 13 cents per watt, which is not unusual. That's how much it costs. And then you add 1 or 2 cents per watt for shipping costs on top of that when you're buying 1,000 or a million of them or how many ever. But the installed cost, he says, in the United States is $3.50 a watt. So you're looking at 13 cents a watt for the panel, say 15 cents with shipping, and that turns into $3.50 a watt once it's installed. That has to change. There's a lot of soft costs and problems with getting solar installed in the United States and here in Canada as well. Opposition to U.S. data centers is accelerating in Q2 2025 alone. An estimated 98 billion in projects were blocked or delayed. That is a lot of money in projects.
Yeah, people are very worried about
them.
these AI data centers because they take so much power. And, we all want that power, including Bill Gates, apparently. I guess he's not really involved with Microsoft anymore, but
I don't think he's very smart, Brian. He's one of these geniuses who does one thing well, gets it off the ground, makes his billions, but he doesn't know how to tie a shoe properly. He just doesn't know everything. When he goes outside of his lane, he looks like a fool. That's because he's been saying, let's talk about, mitigating climate change risk instead of fighting it. Well, he's the guy who said you couldn't electrify trucks. Well, I just had that story in China that proves you wrong, Bill. First Solar just opened a $1.1 billion integrated PV solar manufacturing plant in Louisiana, capable of producing 3.5 gigawatts of panels each year, which is significant, but not China level. The plant will employ more than 700 people if Stephen Miller doesn't shut it down. That's from Electrek. Oh, it's time for CS Fast Facts. City Bike, the bike share rental system in New York City that is a critical option in transit deserts, where the transit system sort of leaves you high and dry, has an annual ridership twice that of the Staten Island Ferry. And not the one that Pete Davidson and the other guy for Saturday Night Live bought to turn into a nightclub. 1,600 oil lobbyists were at COP30. 1,600, Brian, 1,600. Where do they put these MFs? Where do they put them? Well, a lot of people stayed on cruise ships. They docked cruise ships there. But, the oil people probably have their own super yachts offshore parked. So far this year, China has added the following in energy: 252 gigawatts of solar, 70 gigawatts of wind, just 1 gigawatt of nuclear so far, 8 gigawatts of hydro. They're still adding hydro in China, and 65 gigawatts of thermal, such as natural gas and coal. So they're adding everything. But leading the way is solar, and they will start to reduce the thermal soon. As far as additions go, Volkswagen can now build EVs in China, and it claims, and I don't know if I believe this, that it can cut costs by up to 50%. Because I've seen auto analysts who know what they're talking about, go to China and say they could do it for 20% less, which is significant, but 50% less? Now remember, this is not cheap Chinese labor. This is automation. They're really good at automation there and supply chains, so getting everything from the mine right into the car. U.S.
and we know the Volkswagen needs to cut costs because they are in potential financial trouble coming up.
Big time. China is entering Germany and starting to get a foothold on the market there. U.S. Representative Salazar in Venezuela says, we're about to go in. We need to go in. Venezuela for the American oil companies will be a field day. So oil and military action still a thing in 2025, Ryan. Kind of depressing. UC Berkeley is introducing a technology that extends fuel cell life. That's hydrogen fuel cells that turns hydrogen into electricity in cars, whatnot, and lowers green hydrogen costs. It lowers the cost of making green hydrogen could speed up affordable electrolysis for transportation, industry, and storage. That's the UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley campus has got a new technology for fuel cells. The cost of inaction of climate change is something we were just talking about. $7.7 trillion. The total in climate-related damages the U.S. has run up since 2000. That's ridiculous. How do you not pay attention to that?
It's cheaper to deal with it now than the costs of not dealing with it in the future.
China's official news agency puts the country's coal peak at, quote unquote, around 2027 and oil peak around 2026. So that's their official news agency. They're saying coal will peak in a year and a little over a year. I guess we're almost done this one. Well, it's almost 2026. And finally this week, California, Brian, got water. We're always talking about droughts in California and groundwater and all that, and the heavy use of water for plantations such as almonds. I like my delicious almonds. Across California, reservoir storage is now at about 114% of the historical average, marking a significant improvement in water availability. A newly released drought map shows more than 70% of the state is now free from any drought designation. And that's a dramatic shift just from August, when nearly 3/4 of the state was experiencing drought, including a small area categorized as the most severe of levels. That's from ABC. And I just want to throw that in because we're always talking about water. Well, in the long term, not a good thing, but right now, at least going well for California, at least this winter.
All right. So that's our show for this week. You can find us on social media at Clean Energy Pod. If you want to support us, join us at patreon.com/cleanenergypod. And once again, if you want to email cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And please remember to hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to this podcast.
If you want to join our Patreon, now's the time. We've got a bonus episode coming up shortly. Thank you to all of our Clean Club executive members, Green Bastard and Brett Rowley, and the many dozens of other people who support us on Patreon. You make this show possible. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again in 7 days.
The Clean Energy Show.